There are few topics about which there are more cliches than war. In my generation, General Sherman's War is Hell and Edwin Starr's War, What is it good for, were pretty popular. Most of us had the good fortune never to have to fight in an armed conflict. We could afford to imagine a world without guns once the Cold War ended. But amongst those who actually put their lives at risk, whether soldiers, sailors or aircrew, a more common, more realistic sentiment lay in the Roman rubric. If you want peace, prepare for war. For many hundreds of thousands in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Sudan, the warning comes too late. Today, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross, there are over 120 armed conflicts involving 60 nations and over 100 non-state armed groups taking place around the world. Nations are finding ever more inventive ways of using force. New weapons like drone swarms, cyber attacks, disruption from outer space, and potentially lethal bioweapons. And with a gale of change blowing through the White House, long-held assumptions about the loyalty of our friends and allies are being questioned. Tomorrow, with the publication of the Strategic Defence Review, we'll find out how our government plans to confront this new world over the next decade. This morning, we'll try to assess the size of their task. Let's start with the government. A little earlier, I spoke to the Defence Secretary. John Healey, a year ago, your leader promised to smash the gangs that were shipping illegal immigrants across the Channel. It's reported that hundreds of people crossed yesterday, more than in recent times. What went wrong?
Pretty shocking, those scenes yesterday. Truth is, Britain's lost control of its borders over the last 5 years. And the last government last year left an asylum system in chaos and record levels of immigration. I think yesterday tells us a really big problem, which is you've got French police unable to intervene and intercept the boats when they're in shallow waters. That means we saw it. We saw the smugglers launching elsewhere and coming round like a taxi to pick them up. Now, one of the steps, and this is a complex problem, but one of the steps we've now got is the cooperation, new cooperation with the French and an agreement. They'll change the rules so the police can intervene in the water as well as on the shore, and that will help to make a difference to what we saw yesterday.
As you say, the Home Secretary said she's got this new plan, but it's not biting, is it? Because we saw yesterday French police standing by, and if you look at the numbers, the proportion of people intercepted by the French police has actually declined over the last couple of years. 2 years ago, it's 47%. Last year, it's 45%. This year, 38%. That's on your watch. We're not getting much return for 480 million quid, are we?
Well, you're right. It's not a new problem. I remember Chris Phillips, who's now Shadow Home Secretary and was the Immigration Minister 5 years ago, writing that this was a problem, saying it would change. Nothing's changed except the problem's got worse. What has now changed, because of the work that Yvette Cooper has done, is we have that agreement from the French to cooperate, to change the rules so that the French can now, and this is what we want them to put into operation, so they can intervene in the water, not just on the shore.
But the point is they're not doing it. Are you a bit hacked off? I know this may not be a diplomatic thing for you to say. Are you a bit hacked off with the French, that they basically still aren't doing the job, despite the money, despite the agreement? They're still not doing it.
No, they're not doing it, but for the first time, 4 years, for the first time, we've got the level of cooperation needed. We've got the agreement that they will change the way they work, and our concentration now is to push them to get that into operation so they can intercept these smugglers and stop these people in the boats, not just on the shore. And that'll be part of, I hope, dealing with this absolutely intolerable problem and a level of small boat crossings.
All right, look, let's talk about your specific area of responsibility. We're going to have the Strategic Defence Review tomorrow, but can I just start with the American Secretary of Defence, who said on Friday that an invasion of Taiwan by China could be imminent. That's his word. Do you agree?
Well, Pete Hegseth and I talk a lot. He's really restating what we all understand, which is the Chinese Communist Party have said that they want to reunify Taiwan with mainland China. We've always argued that should be diplomatic. We've warned against, and the Americans are warning against, the sort of military action that the Chinese may be threatening. And so that's what Pete Hegseth was saying in strong terms, obviously.
But imminent is a new word. Do you think that that is real?
Well, President Xi has said to his military he wants them to be capable and ready in 2 years' time of taking Taiwan by force if needed. Now, that's the risk that we face. That's why the importance of diplomacy and some of the military deterrence that confuses and perhaps changes the calculation of the Chinese in that Indo-Pacific area is important. But what Pete Hegseth was saying is, don't take the military step. Take the diplomatic route, something that we would endorse. And for Hegseth and I, we work really closely in a number of ways.
OK, but the Americans have always said that. But I think the important thing is his use of the word imminent. It has always been the assumption that the Chinese are playing the long game, that they will just wait and wait. But to say now that an invasion could be imminent, these are his words, is a very different prospect. And really what I'm trying to see is whether you agree that that is a reality, or is this just sabre-rattling?
No, I think Pete Hegseth is right to strike this warning. He's right to look at the growing assertiveness of China in South China Seas and in the Indo-Pacific. And he's right, like we do, to warn China that the future of Taiwan must be settled peacefully, and that any military action will destabilise the whole region and affect us in the UK as well as those countries around the Pacific Rim.
Well, OK, well, let's talk about our place here, because part of what Hegseth was also saying, there was the White House now sees the Indo-Pacific as its principal military theatre, and he then said that that means that other NATO members, specifically us and other Europeans, are going to have to be the principal guarantors of our own defence. Are we ready to fill in for where the Americans decide they need their resources elsewhere?
Well, what President Trump and Pete Hegseth have been saying is what I've been arguing for 5 years, which is that the European nations in NATO need to step up on European security. We have been, and we are. We now, the UK, for the first time, convened, and I chaired the first group of 50 nations supporting Ukraine that the US did not chair. So we've stepped up on Ukraine. We're stepping up on preparing for a potential peace with the coalition of the willing, leading that work alongside the French, and we must do more in NATO, and that's what you'll see in the Strategic Defence Review tomorrow.
Well, I'm coming to that.
A very strong NATO first, because that's our principal responsibility, and that's where our principal security lies.
I'm coming to that, but I want to just make sure that we understand what the contours of the problem are, and just to make it very concrete, our carrier strike group has gone off to has entered the Red Sea this weekend. Now, we previously deployed carrier strike group led by the Queen Elizabeth. That was supported by American vessels. This weekend, the Prince of Wales is being protected by Norwegian, Spanish and Canadian vessels, amongst others. Does that mean that we can't deploy our carriers without the protection of other nations, principally the United States?
No, it means our carrier strike group is a good example of how the UK leads the work of other nations.
Could we deploy it without that support?
It's designed to work with other nations. During these months, it's going to be in the Indo-Pacific.
So we couldn't act on our own?
By the way, the Americans are part of the carrier strike group as well in the Red Sea and will be in the Pacific.
But my point is, my question is, could we do this without them, without the Norwegians, without the Canadians?
But we're part of NATO. We work in an alliance.
But you're not answering my question, are you?
No, the very simple answer is we're part of NATO, a 32-nation-strong alliance. It means we will never fight alone. So our role, as it should be, is to lead where we can, to step up the leadership on wider European security and in NATO. And that's what the SDR vision will set out tomorrow. And the carrier strike group is a good example of that, how we lead. We coordinate the efforts of others, including the Americans, and we work together. And it also underlines this indivisibility between the security we see in the Euro-Atlantic and security in Indo-Pacific. And that's why the work that we do alongside the Americans in particular is so important.
So that's clear. Point one, the SDR, we are not abandoning the doctrine of dependency, interdependence, let's put it this way, on the Americans.
Look, when Pete Hegseth came to the first meeting of that Ukraine contact group that the UK convened and I chaired, he said, look, quite rightly, we're challenging the European nations to step up. But that does not mean the US stepping away.
All right, well, let's talk about specifics. Are we seriously planning to put tactical nuclear weapons on fighter jets?
Well, the SDR tomorrow will set out the new threats we face. On the specifics of that story, I think you'll understand I'm not going to talk about the details of that. But I do want to make a...
But it is being considered. It's an option. Let's put it that way.
Well, those sort of discussions are not conducted in public, and certainly not with a running commentary. I want to make a wider point, though, on our nuclear deterrent, which is this. For nearly 70 years, our UK nuclear deterrent has been the guarantor of our UK security. It's what Putin fears most. And the threats that we face in the future mean that we will always have to do what we need to defend the country. And strong deterrence is absolutely essential in order to keep Britain and the British people safe.
The Prime Minister is saying this morning that we're getting ready for war. Do you genuinely believe that we can do all of the things that you're promising? The expanding, at some point, the number of people under arms, drones, technology and all the rest of it. Do you genuinely believe that you can do all the things that you have that you're going to promise on a budget of 2.5% of GDP?
Well, first of all, it's not just 2.5%. We put an extra the Chancellor has put an extra $5 billion into defence this year. We'll hit 2.
The Prime Minister talked about 2.5% by 2027.
And we'll hit 2.5%, 3 years earlier than anyone expected in 2027, and with an ambition to hit 3% in the next Parliament. And that is enough to deliver the SDR's vision that sets out tomorrow. And that vision is a transformation of Britain's armed forces. It's a transformation of our industrial base so that we get a defence dividend from the defence investment that brings jobs right across Britain.
So you're OK with 2.5%. Just to make be clear about some things, you talked already, this is public, about 6 munition factories, 7,000 long-range missiles. When are those factories going to be in production?
Well, this is the point. We've been running our strategic defence review, but we recognise the urgency of the action that we need to take. That's why the Chancellor's put an extra $5 billion into defence this year. We've signed hundreds of major contracts since we came into government. Yeah. And the announcement today with the £6 billion into munitions over the next 5 years will bring at least another 6 factories. It'll bring long-range weapons for the future.
You're answering a different question to the one I asked you. I asked you when are these factories going to be in production?
Well, the detail of where they are and when they come.
It's not detail.
We'll follow. But
Mr. Putin's watching this. He wants to know: should he be frightened now? Should he be frightened in 2030? Should he be frightened in 2040? What are we talking about? Yeah,
look, the message to Putin is we take our defence seriously. We're stepping up our deterrence. We should expect to see new factories opening very soon. And we've already got strong munitions factories in every part of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And the investment we're making will boost the jobs in those areas as well.
Look, the reason I'm asking you this is you said, actually, separately, that you want to get to 3% of GDP on defence by 2034. In fact, you expect that. Is that right? You expect that will be...
Oh, yeah, look, I look at the way the world is changing. I look at the way that the Chancellor is fixing the economic foundations and that growth is returning to the British economy. Of course, I've got no doubt that we're going to hit that ambition of 3% in the next Parliament.
OK, but the Chief of Defence Staff, Rowley Walker, said this week, and I'm quoting here, he says, the biggest challenge we face of many is simply a lack of time. He said that a sense of urgency is needed to respond to the threats we face. 3% in 9 years' time doesn't sound much like a sense of urgency to most people, never mind the Kremlin and Beijing. Well, they're just going to keep ahead of us.
If all we did was happening in 9 years' time, that would be the case. But in the last few days alone, we've put an extra $1 billion into making our armed forces go digital with a new cyber command, an extra $1.5 billion.
It's a billion defence. The Poles are spending, I can't remember exactly what number.
No, I'm sorry.
Over 4% already, the Poles.
So it's how much you spend, but it's how you spend it. And you ask about a sense of urgency. I've talked to you about the $1 billion gone into cyber, the $1.5 billion we've committed for the next 5 years to improve forces housing. And today, you've mentioned it, the commitment of $6 billion over the next 5 years. That's an extra $1.5 billion into munitions with new factories. And the importance of that is this helps, and the SDR does this, learn the lessons from Ukraine. Because what the lessons from Ukraine tell us is that the country's armed forces are only as strong as the industry that stands behind them. So the investment is not just about filling warehouses with fresh missiles. It's about making sure that in Britain we have an industrial base that can innovate and that can scale up its production if we're faced with conflict in the future.
Everybody has heard your point, the point that you've made, that we live in more dangerous times than we have done since the Cold War. You've told me this morning the scale of the challenge that you think we face. The question I'm really asking about is whether the response that we're producing matches anything like that challenge. Now, here's a concrete thing. Mr. Zelensky said this week that the Russians are producing over 100,000 long-range drones each year. Now, you're talking about putting more money into production of drones. How many are we going to produce?
Well, let me give you an example. Over the last year, we've produced over 10,000 drones for Ukraine in Britain.
10,000?
Over the next,
Russians producing 100,000.
Over the next year, we'll produce tens of thousands of more. And the SDR is saying, pull the lessons from Ukraine and start doing some of that in the similar way for our own industry and our own forces in this country. And so it's about transforming the military capability of our forces in Britain by combining the power of innovation, AI, drones, autonomy with the hard metal of tanks, artillery and planes. It's about a jobs dividend and making sure that we can boost jobs right across Britain with this new defence investment, and it's about putting people right at the heart of it with better pay and better housing. That's how we strengthen the armed forces. That's how we keep the British people safer.
OK, we'll hear more tomorrow. Just a couple of quick questions, if you don't mind. Attorney General has been accused by opposition parties of smearing them as Nazis. Is he going to be sacked?
Oh, look, he's apologised. He accepts that his phrases and his speech was misjudged. Look, he's a really good Attorney General. He made a mistake.
OK.
He's apologised. We move on.
All right. Prime Minister called a press conference at a few hours' notice on Thursday, at which he spoke for 7 minutes, mostly about Nigel Farage's Reform Party. That just has 5 MPs. And by the way, because I'm nerdy like this, his speech had 1,100 words, 750 of them were about Nigel Farage. Why is he panicking?
He's not panicking.
Why does the Prime Minister go into a hangar to talk about a bloke who's got 5 MPs on a week when, you know, the Russians are threatening, trade wars, all the rest of it? Look, this is panic.
He's challenging a party leader, Nigel Farage. He's challenging a party that did very well in the local elections. He's challenging a party that is a leader who is soft on Putin, that wants to sell off the NHS, that is making massive promises that he can't fund and won't deliver. And why the Prime Minister is saying this is that we face across the board, irrespective of party, a crisis of people's confidence and conviction that government can make a difference and anything can change the things they see that are wrong in this country. That's the hard yards of what we're trying to do in government. But Keir Starmer's absolutely right to challenge Nigel Farage against these easy, soft solutions and the promises that are false and he can never deliver. That's why he was right to do that speech.
John Healey, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks very much.